Good afternoon, members of the school board. My name is Loki Velasco, and I'm here to speak about a topic that is at the base of the education system: oppression in American education. Now, that title may feel attacking to some, but when we look at the data and who is funded, who is represented, and who is supported in our classrooms, the word oppression is not an overstatement. It is a proper description of our school system as a whole. Today, I will address 3 specific examples of this problem. First, the wildly uneven economic playing field that determines educational outcomes before a child or student even enters school. The lack of educator diversity, particularly for Latino students, and the systemic failures in supporting students with individualized education programs, or IEPs. My goal is not just to present the problems that exist, it is to make a case, which is grounded in research, for specific, actionable change. Starting with a general scale of it all, just to have a baseline idea of what we're looking at. Latino students account for 27% of all K-12 enrollment nationwide. And in highly populated cities like Los Angeles, that number shoots all the way up to a shocking 75% of K-12 enrollment, even though Latino teachers make up only about 9% of the total teaching workforce. Over 7 million students in the U.S. have IEPs, or individualized education programs. These students have legally mandated rights to appropriate support, and yet many are placed in classrooms without those very resources they need to succeed. And the single greatest predictor of a school's quality, above all else, is the wealth of the neighborhood for which it sits. Not the talent of the students, not the effort of the teachers, the zip code. Those 5 digits determine everything. These are not accents. They are the outputs of systems built on inequality. The website confrontingpoverty.org uses an analogy that I really liked because it uses one of my favorite board games as the example. Imagine a game of Monopoly, but there is no equality. In this example, player 1 begins with $5,000 and properties already in hand. And if you've played before, you know it is incredibly advantageous to have properties. Player 2 starts with the standard $1,500, and player 3 begins with only $250. The rules of the game are normal, not changed in any way, but the outcome is pretty much already decided from the start. Player 3 can't afford to take the risks that player 1 can, without consequences. One bad turn can mean losing the entire game. Now look at it as if it wasn't a game. It's the American education system. A child's pathway is decided by the wealth of their parents and the neighborhood they're born into, which will shape the quality of their schooling, leading to a smaller pool of their career options, which affects their long-term health and economic stability. The chain graphic on this slide shows that compounding cycle. Each link reinforces the next. This is structural oppression operating at the level of policy and design, not individual failure. This chart illustrates something that we know but rarely say plainly. Schools in wealthy areas receive dramatically more funding per student than schools in low-income areas, or in this case, states. Using this chart, we can see how fair people see the funding distribution per state, with Nevada having the lowest at a 57% fairness score, and Utah having the highest at a large 141% fairness score. The Ed Law Center describes funding distribution as the key question of whether a state's funding system recognizes the need for educational resources for students in settings of concentrated student poverty. The states are classified as progressive if high poverty, 30% districts, receive at least 5% additional funding over low poverty, 0% districts. Regressive if high poverty districts receive 5% less funding than low poverty districts, and flat if they fall in between. That fair funding distribution gap translates into teacher quality and retention. Technology, counselors, extracurriculars like clubs, the entire educational ecosystem surrounding a child, especially in places with a low fairness score like Nevada. When we refuse to address funding inequity, we we are choosing to perpetuate it. That is a policy decision. It is one that this board has the power to challenge. According to a 2022 study published by Latinos for Education, written by Dr. Felisa Ortiz-Lycon and Dr. Travis Bristol, having a teacher who shares your background and lived experience produces measurably better outcomes for Latino students in academic achievement, attendance, and in a student's sense of belonging within their school. And yet, the numbers on this slide tell a story of wild discrepancy. 27% of global K-12 students are Latino, but only 9% of the teachers are. When students can't see themselves in a position of educational authority, like I did when I was a student, the idea is put into them that people like them, people of color, do not teach, they do not lead, they do not hold power in academic spaces. That message shapes their sense of what is possible for them. That is a form of mental oppression that will build up, intentional or not. Ortiz-Lycon and Bristol state that in places like New York City and Los Angeles, Latino students make up 40 and 75% of enrollment respectively. And to me, that gap is shocking, to say the least. These students should be able to see themselves in positions of people who teach them and lead them, like I did when I was a student, especially in primary school. Third topic I want to bring up is the constant ignorance towards proper support for students with disabilities, specifically students with IEPs. There's a myth that goes around many schools' cultures that students with IEPs can't succeed in general education curriculum, that they need to be separated, have content slowed, or be given entirely different material. James Thompson, who wrote for EDUtopia in 2022, counters that idea directly. He explains that meeting criteria for an IEP does not make someone a different learner. It means that they have a unique support needs. When a student with an IEP is struggling in general education classroom, the problem is not with the curriculum. It doesn't need to change. It is the absence of proper support. Over 7 million children have IEPs, so when we consistently underfund special education, when we rely on overwhelmed teachers without adequate training or support staff, we are not falling short despite our best efforts. We are choosing not to invest in what these students need. So what am I asking of you today? 3 things. First, I ask for funding reform. Relying on local property taxes to fund public schools is one of the worst and most unbalanced policies in American education as a whole. The school board should show support in state and federal policies that redistribute educational resources towards those of the highest need areas. Children's education should not depend on where their parents can afford to live. Second, I ask for investment in educator diversity. This board should establish clear goals of hiring and keeping educators of color and create paid residency pathways in partnership with Hispanic-serving institutions and community organizations, such as the 1 Million Teachers of Color. Representation must be a priority, not an afterthought. Third, I ask that special education be fully funded. Every student with an IEP deserves to be given adequate instructional support within general education. We must stop treating special education as something to be trimmed and start treating it as a core piece for educational equity. These are not radical demands. They are the minimum conditions for an education system to remain just. Thank you for listening.